flight attendant refused to let black woman sit in first class. Turns out she owns the plane. Have you ever witnessed a moment so blatantly unjust that it makes your heart pound with outrage only for fate to serve a swift, stunning twist? Imagine a packed flight at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, brimming with holiday travelers. A seemingly routine boarding process transforms into an explosive confrontation when an overzealous flight attendant refuses to let a soft-spoken black woman take her rightful seat in first class. Little does anyone suspect that this elegant passenger, humble in appearance, is no ordinary flyer. In fact, she secretly owns the very aircraft they're on. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. Ella Carter stood in the crowded terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, the hum of announcements echoing through the cavernous space. She felt a surge of excitement for her upcoming flight to New York City, where she was scheduled to meet with her philanthropic foundation's board. Although Ella generally flew privately for business, today she had opted to travel under the radar on a commercial flight to quietly observe airline operations from an everyday passenger's perspective. Ella, after all, was not just a successful entrepreneur. She was the co-owner of a high-end charter plane company that had been steadily expanding. However, she had decided to invest in a smaller commercial airline as well, hoping to improve flight experiences for all travelers, especially those who might, like her, have once felt marginalized. Her usual entourage was absent. She was dressed in understated attire, comfortable slacks, a neatly pressed blouse, and a pair of sensible flats. Despite her low profile, Ella couldn't ignore the subtle glances from passers-by, likely intrigued by her poised yet approachable demeanor. Those who knew Ella well understood that her calm surface concealed an indomitable spirit, the same spirit that had propelled her from an underprivileged childhood to the pinnacle of the business world. The swirl of holiday travelers bustled around her. Families wrestled with suitcases, couples held hands nervously or cheerfully, and business travelers scrolled through emails on smartphones. Ella gracefully maneuvered through the crowd, already holding a first-class boarding pass that one of her personal assistants had procured. But Ella intended to evaluate the airline's staff, check-in process, and onboard hospitality firsthand. The moment she reached the gate, she noticed a distinctive tension in the air. Some individuals were given courtesy smiles, some were mildly ignored, and others were subjected to suspicious, prolonged stares. A harried gate attendant was busy scanning tickets. Ella waited patiently, stepping aside to observe the gate staff's dynamics. She watched as a mother, with two young children, all dressed in worn-out clothes, awkwardly approached to ask if there was any possibility of getting seats together. The gate agent offered a thin smile and simply repeated that the flight was full, lacking any real empathy. Ella's heart clenched. She made a mental note to address training in empathy and conflict resolution with her newly acquired airline staff. Whenever Ella purchased a controlling stake in an organization, she believed in introducing a culture of compassion, synergy, and genuine service. She sincerely hoped to shift the entire airline's ethos if she could. When it was Ella's turn, the gate agent scanned her ticket automatically. The reaction was perfunctory and a bit puzzled, probably because the system recognized the first-class seat, but Ella herself didn't fit the stereotypical image the agent might have expected. Ella offered a warm smile, thanked him, and moved forward, noticing the subtle confusion still etched on his face. She didn't hold it against him. Internal biases are often subconscious. She knew from personal experience, but they can nevertheless wound. She intended to remedy such issues not by condemnation alone, but by training and dialogue. The walkway to the airplane was narrower than Ella remembered from her private charters. She could recall vividly how cramped such spaces could feel when she was a child flying coach on discount airlines, her mother juggling a battered suitcase, and Ella's younger siblings. Yet Ella felt a spark of excitement that her position now allowed her to bring transformation to such experiences. She just needed a solid, thorough understanding of the day-to-day operations from the perspective of an average passenger. That was the impetus for her incognito flight today. Upon entering the plane, Ella noticed the flight attendant directing traffic, a middle-aged woman with sharp features, impeccably styled hair, and a name tag that read Sarah Whitman. Sarah wielded a polite smile like a thin veil over an anxious or perhaps rigidly controlled personality. She greeted each passenger with the same script, though Ella noted subtle differences in how Sarah interacted with different people. "Hello and welcome. Seats to the right, please," Sarah would say, giving a half nod to some travelers. But Ella watched her carefully. An older white man got a genuine grin and a warm "Thank you for flying with us, sir." A young black mother with 2 toddlers merely received a half-hidden sigh and a perfunctory wave toward the back of the cabin. When Ella handed Sarah her boarding pass for seat 3A in first class, Sarah's eyes flicked to Ella's face in an almost involuntary assessment. A moment of tension flashed across the attendant's features, as though Ella's presence in first class were an immediate puzzle that needed solving. Sarah's eyebrows raised slightly, and her tone became more clipped. "MAAM, she said. "Let me see that ticket again." Ella, calm and polite, offered the paper once more. "Here you go," she said, keeping her voice unruffled. She sensed, from years of practice, the undercurrents of prejudice that were swirling in the attendant's mind. Ella didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the signs were all too familiar. Sarah took an extra moment to study the ticket, running her finger across the seat assignment. Then she forced a tight smile. "Yes, well," she said, "we're having a slight issue with seat assignments right now. Why don't you wait in the aisle here? I need to handle some urgent matters." Ella had traveled enough to know that urgent matters typically meant either a last-minute seat change or a suspicion that Ella might be out of place. She simply nodded. "Of course," she replied, stepping aside as more passengers squeezed behind her in the narrow aisle. Some, Ella noted, cast sympathetic glances her way. While she waited, Ella scanned the first-class cabin. Plush seats arranged in pairs, spaced enough to offer considerable legroom, each with a polished fold-out table. A couple of seats were still unoccupied. She saw a well-dressed man with an expensive briefcase fussing with his overhead luggage. Across from him sat a woman engrossed in a finance magazine. The rest of the seats were a mix of casual business travelers and a few vacationers who had splurged on premium tickets. None of them seemed to notice Ella's predicament, or if they did, they didn't appear willing to intervene. Sarah returned with a more resolute expression. "There's been a bit of a misunderstanding," she told Ella. "We'll need you to move to a seat in the main cabin. We're overbooked in first class." Ella blinked, her expression open but firm. "I was assigned seat 3A, and I purchased a first-class fare. Could you verify if there really is an overbooking issue, or if it's just a matter of re-checking your seat assignment system?" Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. "Ma'am, we have an important passenger who needs that seat. We're asking for your cooperation. It's standard procedure in these cases to seat first-class passengers by priority, and we have a top-tier flyer who just came aboard. I appreciate your understanding. You can follow me, please." Ella gazed at Sarah, feeling that old sting of prejudice slice through her chest. However, Ella had come here to observe the airline's failings and to see how best to rectify them. If she revealed her identity too early, she might undermine the authenticity of her learning experience. Yet she also believed in standing up for herself. For now, Ella opted to push back politely, in her calm but unwavering manner. "I understand you have an overbooking policy," Ella said, But is there a reason it has to apply to me? Couldn't we instead ask for volunteers to move to the main cabin, possibly with compensation? Sarah's eyes flashed with impatience. If you can't cooperate, we'll have to involve higher authorities. We have a timeline to maintain, and we can't hold the flight for seat disputes. Now, please move, or I'll have to notify the captain. A hush began to settle among nearby passengers. Ella noticed the cluster of eyes turning toward her. She weighed her options. While she wanted to keep her cover, she also didn't want to simply capitulate to what felt like blatant discrimination. The synergy of the entire scenario revolved around Sarah's immediate assumption that Ella, a black woman dressed modestly, did not belong in first class. After a beat, Ella forced a small, calm smile. "All right," she said softly. "I'll comply for the moment, but I do have a formal complaint to make about this process." Sarah's mouth tightened again. "You're welcome to do so." With that, Ella stepped aside to let a tall man in a business suit, likely the so-called top-tier flyer, slide past her, looking somewhat flustered. He cast Ella a confused glance, but Ella simply stepped back and turned away to quell the sense of humiliation welling in her. Another flight attendant with a friendlier face approached Ella from behind and indicated a seat in the main cabin. Ella followed, reflecting on how crucial it was to address these very issues within the new airline she had a stake in. Ella found herself seated near the back of the plane, close to the restrooms and the galley where attendants constantly bustled in and out. It was far from the comfort of first class. The seat was narrower, legroom nearly non-existent, but Ella took a quiet breath and settled in, adjusting her small carry-on bag under the seat. If she were a typical passenger, she might feel anger or shame at being booted from her rightful seat in such a humiliating manner. Ella, however, possessed a reservoir of composure honed through years of adversity. Her thoughts drifted to her childhood in Atlanta's tough neighborhoods. As a child, Ella had often felt overshadowed, her aspirations drowned out by the daily struggles of her working-class family. In a home with 3 siblings and a single mother holding down multiple jobs, Ella learned early on that society often judged her by her skin color, her environment, and her lack of resources. Teachers, bus drivers, store clerks, many brushed her aside or failed to see her potential, yet Ella had refused to let those assumptions define her. She remembered her first successful entrepreneurial venture, a youth-run car wash in the summer of her high school sophomore year. With borrowed hoses and sponges, Ella organized local teens to wash cars at bargain prices, splitting profits fairly among the group. The neighborhood had never seen anything like it, and Ella's sense of leadership blossomed. That small project ignited a lifelong passion for business and for uplifting those around her. Through scholarships, Ella attended a top business school. She excelled in her studies, but the echoes of prejudice persisted. Classmates sometimes assumed she was only there because of affirmative action or an athletic scholarship. Professors occasionally questioned whether her ideas were truly hers. Each time, Ella responded with diligence and resilience, continuing to push boundaries until she graduated near the top of her class. Later, Ella built successful startups, culminating in a national chain of boutique hotels known for their inclusive hiring practices and progressive community initiatives. And now, ironically, Ella was facing that same old prejudice on an airplane she quite literally had partial ownership of. It stung, but Ella reminded herself that she had come here to experience the airline's daily reality, the flaws in its corporate culture, and the spaces where employees might need training in empathy, bias awareness, and customer service. Regardless, Ella thought, this was a moment to stand up, not just for herself, but for every person who had been unjustly relegated to the back, told they didn't belong. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint hum of the overhead speaker. The captain announced that boarding was complete. Soon the plane pushed back from the gate, the engines roaring into life as they taxied toward the runway. Ella glanced out the window to see Atlanta's skyline in the distance. She exhaled and prepared herself for what she suspected would be a pivotal flight, and not just for her own future decisions, but for the airline itself. The aircraft climbed steadily, piercing through layers of clouds until the seatbelt sign blinked off. Passengers began shifting around. Some rummaged in overhead bins, others reached for the in-flight magazines. Flight attendants started their beverage service. Ella soon spotted Sarah making her way down the aisle, a polite but terse smile fixed on her face. She was offering cups of water and soda to each row. As Sarah approached Ella's row, Ella noticed a bit of hesitation in the attendant's posture, like she recognized Ella from earlier, but wasn't certain how to handle the lingering tension. Indeed, Ella could sense Sarah's discomfort. The flight attendant wore the same taut expression Ella had seen many times, a mixture of wariness and slight contempt, perhaps tinged with defensiveness. "Would you like something to drink, ma'am?" Sarah asked curtly, all business. Her eye contact fleeting. "Just water, please," Ella replied, giving a polite nod. Sarah poured water into a plastic cup, but Ella could see that the attendant's hand trembled slightly. Then Sarah quickly moved on. After that, Ella watched Sarah interact with a row of college students behind her, and Ella was struck by how the attendant's tone changed, entirely becoming lighter, friendlier. Her bias was subtle but unmistakable. Minutes later, Ella's seatmate, a chatty older woman named Felicia, leaned in closer. She had witnessed the earlier exchange. "I saw what happened up there," Felicia said in a quiet voice. "You had a first-class seat, didn't you?" Ella offered a small nod, cautious. "Yes, I did." "That's just awful," Felicia said sympathetically, pressing a hand to her chest. "You know, I fly often, and I've never seen them just yank someone out of first class like that, without offering compensation or a volunteer swap." She shook her head with disapproval. "I'm not trying to pry, but it seemed so unfair. I'm sorry you had to go through that." "Thank you," Ella said, forcing a gentle smile. "I appreciate your concern, but you know, I'll be okay." Felicia sighed. "You carry yourself with grace, honey. If it were me, I'd have given that woman a piece of my mind." Ella suppressed a chuckle. She was grateful for Felicia's empathy, but Ella's long-term goal was bigger than a one-time confrontation. She intended to transform the entire airline culture so that no one else would have to face such treatment. Still, she made a mental note. Sarah had definitely singled her out for reasons Ella suspected had little to do with any legitimate seat issue. As the plane continued on its steady route, Ella observed the rest of the cabin staff. Some were more warm and welcoming. A young male flight attendant cracked jokes and offered extra snacks to the kids on board, earning giggles in return. A second female attendant gave Ella a genuine smile when she passed by with the cart. The disparity between Sarah's frosty demeanor and the other's kindness was stark. Ella knew that individual biases could tarnish a passenger's entire impression of an airline. One negative encounter can overshadow a dozen friendly faces. About an hour into the flight, the plane hit unexpected turbulence. It began as a soft jolt, prompting Ella to grip her armrest. The seatbelt sign blinked on. An uneasy hush fell over the cabin as the aircraft shook again, more violently this time. Ella heard a clink as someone's drink spilled onto the floor. A baby cried in the distance. Passengers exchanged anxious looks. The captain's voice crackled over the speakers. "Folks, we've encountered some unpredicted weather patterns. Please return to your seats and fasten your seat belts. Flight attendants, discontinue service until further notice." Sarah and the other attendants hurried to secure carts and lock them in place. Overhead compartments rattled. Several overhead bins popped open, suitcases precariously close to tumbling out. Ella noticed a flight attendant struggling to latch one bin near the exit row, bracing her shoulder against it as the plane lurched again. "Please remain calm," Sarah's voice called out as she tried to weave her way down the aisle, assisting where she could. The plane dipped suddenly, sending a jolt of panic through the cabin. Ella steadied herself, re-checking her seatbelt. The seatmate Felicia grabbed Ella's hand in fear. Ella squeezed it reassuringly. Moments of turbulence always reminded Ella of life's unpredictability, how easily calm can transform into chaos. She took slow breaths, steadying her nerves. She glanced at Sarah, who was now barking instructions to the row behind Ella, urging them to stow loose items. Despite Ella's frustration with the attendant, she felt a twinge of empathy. In such situations, flight attendants must ensure the safety of 100 or more souls in a giant metal tube hurtling through the sky. The captain's voice crackled again, instructing the attendants to take their seats. Ella saw Sarah hurrying toward the front of the plane. Another violent shake made her lose her balance, and she toppled against a seat. Though Ella was too far to help physically, she winced sympathetically. Sarah quickly righted herself and continued forward. After a few harrowing minutes, the turbulence subsided to mild bumps. A wave of relieved chatter swept through the cabin. Babies resumed cooing, passengers exhaled, and Ella felt Felicia's hand trembling less. Eventually, the captain announced that the worst of the weather had passed, and flight attendants could resume limited service. As Ella relaxed against her seat, she silently reflected on how a sudden crisis can unify or fracture people. This particular airline had staff of varying dispositions. Some soared under pressure, like the male attendant who had calmly assured passengers near the galley. Others, like Sarah, clearly had a more tenuous grip on composure, possibly exacerbated by personal biases. An hour later, the flight was again on a smooth course, and the attendants resumed normal service. The cabin smelled faintly of freshly brewed coffee as they served beverages. Ella was still somewhat tense from the turbulence, but she welcomed the sense of normalcy returning. Suddenly, Ella noticed a stir at the front of the cabin. A well-dressed black man in business attire was making his way down the aisle, clearly upset. He was approaching Sarah, who had just handed a can of cola to a passenger in row 12. The man had a stern expression, and Ella could hear snatches of his words as he confronted Sarah. "Told me I couldn't use the first-class lavatory, even though my seat is 2C, he said, voice rising. I had to wait in line for the main cabin restroom." Ella's brow furrowed. First, she had been displaced from first class. Now, apparently another black passenger was being told he couldn't use a first-class amenity, even though he was seated there. The pattern was glaringly obvious. Sarah, flustered, forced a polite smile. "Sir, we have certain guidelines. Sometimes the forward lavatory is reserved." He cut her off. "Reserved for who? People who look a certain way. I had an upgrade because of my platinum membership. Not that it should matter. I pay for these tickets year-round. Now you're telling me I'm not allowed to use the front lavatory? That's unacceptable." Sarah's face paled. Her eyes darted around, as though seeking backup from her colleagues, but they were engaged elsewhere. Finally, she waved a dismissive hand. "Sir, please lower your voice. We can address this calmly. If you have a concern, you can file a complaint with customer service." The man let out a dry laugh, stepping back. "Oh, I will. You can count on that." He spun on his heel and marched back toward first class, leaving a wake of curious, murmuring passengers behind him. Ella felt a knot of anger in her stomach. Sarah's behavior was no coincidence. It was an unmistakable pattern of discrimination, intangible enough for Sarah to hide behind policy, but blatant enough to be recognized by anyone paying attention. Ella wondered just how many times Sarah had singled out minority passengers with the veneer of standard procedure. A younger flight attendant approached Ella's row, to distribute more beverages, momentarily interrupting Ella's thoughts. The attendant apologized to everyone for the earlier turbulence and offered a cookie or pretzel snack. Ella politely declined, her mind still swirling with the frustration of seeing how Sarah had treated not one, but two black first-class passengers in a single flight. Soon, Ella noticed some passengers beginning to whisper amongst themselves, gesturing occasionally in her direction. At first, Ella dismissed it as idle chatter. Then she realized that a man a few rows up kept glancing at her with a spark of recognition. He looked middle-aged, wore a crisp shirt, and typed on a tablet intermittently. A moment later, that same man stood up, walked discreetly down the aisle, and leaned over Ella's row. "Excuse me," he said in a hushed tone. "Are you Ella Carter by any chance? The hotel magnate?" The Ella Carter who started the Carter Education Foundation. Felicia's eyes lit up, and Ella felt a jolt of surprise. So much for flying incognito. She had hoped her more modest attire and the frantic travel season would allow her to blend in, but Ella had a recognizable face to those who followed certain business or philanthropic circles. She also had done local commercials for her philanthropic work. She wasn't on the celebrity scale of Oprah Winfrey, but within certain markets, Ella's name carried a spark of recognition. Ella offered a polite nod, putting a finger to her lips in a gentle gesture, indicating she wanted to keep things quiet. "Please," she whispered, "I'm traveling privately. Keep it on the down low." The man looked both excited and concerned, glancing around. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter. I didn't mean to blow your cover. I just recognized you because my firm once partnered with your foundation's scholarship program. My name's Jonathan Reed. I'm with the New Horizons Consulting Group." Ella extended her hand with a warm smile. "Jonathan, nice to meet you again." She realized they had crossed paths at a charity gala, though briefly. "How have you been?" He returned the smile, albeit with a hint of sympathy. "I'm well, but I happened to see what transpired during boarding about your seat, and I saw you talking to that flight attendant. It seemed, well, off." Ella's face tightened, but she kept her voice controlled. "It's a complicated situation. I'm still assessing it, so to speak." Jonathan nodded. "I don't want to pry, but if you need a witness or anything, just know I saw how that flight attendant treated you. If you're filing a complaint, I'd back you up." "Thank you," Ella replied gratefully. "I appreciate that." He gave a nod of solidarity, then returned to his seat. Ella saw him discreetly pass the information on to a woman in his row, presumably a colleague or spouse. The woman gave Ella a thoughtful look. So, Ella thought, the cat was halfway out of the bag. If more people recognized her, it could create a stir. More importantly, Ella had to consider her next move. This incognito trip was partly to gauge the airline's culture. She never expected to be personally targeted in such a blatant manner. Now, Ella wanted not only to file a complaint, but also to ensure that the flight attendant's conduct was properly addressed. At the same time, Ella wanted to time her reveal for maximum impact, as self-serving as that might sound. Sometimes, people only believe or pay attention to a problem when an individual with power calls it out openly. In the row behind Ella, a pair of teenage girls typed furiously on their phones, whispering excitedly. Ella suspected they might be fans of her philanthropic or entrepreneurial journey. They could have recognized Ella from social media, where Ella had a modest but loyal following. Ella could almost hear the cogs turning. Why is Ella Carter seated back here? Doesn't she usually travel in style? The rumor mill churned on at 35,000 feet. With each passing moment, Ella grew more certain that a public confrontation might be inevitable. She noticed Sarah glancing occasionally in her direction. Ella wondered if the flight attendant had recognized her name or face by now. If not, Ella suspected it was only a matter of time before the airline staff connected the dots. Nevertheless, Ella stayed in her seat, calmly reviewing some notes for her upcoming meeting. She was due in New York to finalize the details of a substantial donation to an inner-city youth mentorship program. The philanthropic efforts Ella championed were near and dear to her heart, especially given her upbringing. She had never lost sight of where she came from or the barriers she faced. Instances like this only reminded her of the deeply ingrained prejudices still lurking in society. A short while later, Ella sensed movement near her shoulder. She looked up to see Sarah standing in the aisle, arms crossed over her navy blue uniform, lips pressed into a thin line. "Miss Carter," Sarah said stiffly, "could I speak with you privately near the galley?" Ella lifted an eyebrow, exchanging a brief look with Felicia, who pursed her lips in concern. "Of course," Ella said. She rose, carefully maneuvering out of her seat and following Sarah toward the back of the plane. Several heads turned to watch them go, curiosity evident in their expressions. In the cramped galley space, Sarah's expression flickered between apprehension and defiance. She kept her voice low. "I realize now that you have a high profile," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Some passengers recognized you as Ella Carter, the businesswoman?" Ella nodded calmly, crossing her arms. She had expected this conversation, but Sarah's posture suggested defensiveness rather than remorse. "That's correct," Ella said. "I do have a background in business, among other things." Sarah glanced around to ensure no one else was within earshot. "Look, I had no idea who you were when you boarded. The seat reassignments were standard. I was just following protocol." Ella took a slow breath, meeting Sarah's gaze. "Were you? Because it looked a lot like you targeted me specifically, and then you targeted another black passenger in first class, telling him he couldn't use the forward lavatory." Sarah tensed, her cheeks coloring. There was a request from a regular passenger with top-tier status. He needed a seat in first class. We had to make room, and your seat was the only one we could change. She paused, then added, "As for the lavatory, we discourage people from the back coming forward." Ella cut in quietly. "He wasn't from the back, he was in 2C. So that explanation doesn't hold water." Sarah's face paled. She exhaled, adopting a more pleading tone. "Miss Carter, I'm just doing my job. I have a family to support, and I can't afford to lose my position. If you have an issue, talk to management, but please don't make a scene and get me fired. You don't know how hard it is to..." Ella felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. She despised how Sarah was twisting the narrative, yet Ella also understood that many people lash out or discriminate from a place of deeply ingrained biases they might not consciously acknowledge. Ella responded quietly but firmly. "Sarah, the only reason we're having this conversation is because of how you treated me and other passengers. I'm not here to get you fired. I'm here because I care about fairness and equity values that I want this airline to uphold. I want you to be aware of how your actions come across." Sarah's eyes flicked with anger. "Well, maybe you should consider how easy it is for you to talk about fairness and equity from your position of privilege," she said bitterly. "You're Ella Carter, multi-millionaire. A big shot. You can have a private jet if you want. Why are you even on a commercial flight in the first place?" Ella stared at her, momentarily taken aback by the attendant's audacity. She measured her words carefully. "I flew commercial today to see, firsthand, how passengers are treated. And in the future, trust me, that will matter a great deal when we're reorganizing how this airline operates. You may not realize this, Sarah, but I'm in a position to implement changes within this airline. Real changes." Sarah's expression hardened. She seemed to sense Ella's meaning. Ella was more than just a wealthy passenger. She had influence over the airline's operations. But Ella didn't elaborate further. Instead, she let her words hang in the air. "I suggest you return to your duties," Ella said quietly. We can continue this conversation later if you wish, but I hope you'll reflect on how you treated me and the man in 2C. Sarah swallowed, nodded stiffly, and ducked away. Ella stood in the galley for a moment, her heart pounding with both residual anger and empathy. This was precisely the kind of systemic prejudice that Ella had vowed to combat. It seemed her incognito trip had become more personal than she anticipated. Ella returned to her seat, where Felicia patted her hand sympathetically. From across the aisle, Jonathan gave her an encouraging nod, yet Ella also felt the weight of multiple eyes on her. Word had spread that Ella Carter, the Ella Carter, was aboard. People whispered, some in awe, some in confusion, some in judgment. Ella didn't relish the attention, but she was no stranger to it. A short while later, Ella began reviewing the airline's operational procedures documents she had discreetly accessed before her flight. She kept them on a sleek tablet, scanning through training guidelines for flight attendants. In the seat pocket in front of her, Ella also found the airline's official magazine. She flipped through it absent-mindedly, pausing on a page that featured a short piece about the airline's partnership with various charities. Ella grimaced at the cheerful corporate PR. Clearly, there was a disconnect between the brand image and the on-the-ground reality of staff training and attitudes. Halfway through the flight, Ella noticed some passengers glancing out the windows, pointing to a beautiful view of the coastline far below. The ocean stretched into the horizon. Ella thought of how the earth looked so peaceful from above, belying the tensions simmering within the cabin. She felt an odd sense of calm, a clarity that the confrontation with Sarah, while unpleasant, was necessary to spark deeper institutional changes. The flight's final hour brought an unexpected announcement. The pilot's voice came on, sounding apologetic. "Folks, I've just been informed that we'll be encountering a delay upon landing at LaGuardia due to inclement weather. Air traffic control is stacking incoming flights, so we may circle for a bit. Please remain in your seats until further notice." A collective groan spread through the cabin. Ella sighed, mindful that her philanthropic board meeting was time-sensitive. But she texted her team using the plane's Wi-Fi to let them know about the delay. By the time Ella finished her messages, she noticed that Sarah was no longer the flight attendant handing out refreshments in the cabin. Another attendant had taken over. Ella wondered if Sarah had retreated to the front or stepped aside for a break, or perhaps she had realized that Ella was more influential than she initially thought. Suddenly, Ella's phone pinged with an email from her executive assistant. The subject line read, "Acquisition finalized." Ella's eyes widened as she read the brief message. "Congratulations, Ella. The final deal is sealed. You now have a 51% controlling stake in the airline we discussed. The official announcement will be made tomorrow morning. Here are the key points. Safe travels." Her heart leapt. So it was done. Ella had spent months negotiating with the airline's board and investors. While the official rebranding and public statement would come later, Ella was effectively the majority owner. The flight she was on belonged, in a very literal sense, to a company under Ella's leadership. That meant Sarah was not just dealing with a wealthy passenger, but with the new controlling stakeholder of her employer. Ella felt a mix of triumph and gravity. She had the power to overhaul hiring processes, staff training, and accountability measures. She could institute anti-discrimination policies with real teeth, but Ella also had the burden of leadership. If she handled Sarah's situation poorly, it could create a chilling effect among the staff, or it could appear tyrannical. Ella believed in second chances provided the individual showed genuine remorse and willingness to change. The plane began its descent into New York after a protracted holding pattern. Rain-slicked clouds whipped past the windows, and the runway lights of LaGuardia eventually appeared below. The plane bumped as it touched down on the wet tarmac, drawing gasps and relieved sighs from passengers. Soon, the aircraft taxied toward the gate. As passengers stood to retrieve their overhead luggage, Ella remained seated, letting the crowd shuffle past. She had only a small carry-on bag anyway. She noticed some people casting furtive glances at her. Felicia gave Ella a warm smile, wishing her good luck in her endeavors. Jonathan Reed paused to say, "I'm sorry about the ordeal, Miss Carter. Let me know if you need anything from a legal standpoint or witness statement. I have your foundation's contact info." Ella thanked him, touched by the solidarity of strangers. Once the aisles were less congested, Ella stepped into them, preparing to exit. When she reached the front, she saw Sarah huddled near the cockpit door with another flight attendant. Sarah averted her gaze as Ella approached. Ella nearly kept walking, but something compelled her to stop. She cleared her throat, addressing Sarah directly. "Sarah, I just want to say I hope we can talk again under better circumstances." Sarah looked torn between defiance and worry. She forced a small nod. "Yes, Miss Carter," she murmured. "Have a good day." Ella offered no further comment. She proceeded out the aircraft door into the jet bridge, feeling the cool draft of air from outside. Each step resonated with the knowledge of what was to come. This airline was hers now, and justice would find its way into the story. Ella believed in a principle called restorative accountability, holding people responsible while also offering a path to redemption. After exiting the gate area, Ella met her driver, who escorted her to a waiting car. Her phone buzzed again this time. It was the airline's CEO, Mark Chambers. Ella answered, hearing the man's excited tone echo through the line. He congratulated her on officially becoming their majority stakeholder and asked if she was still on track for their meeting at the corporate office that afternoon. "I just landed," Ella said, stepping into the black SUV. "I'm about to head straight there, though I might be a bit late because of the weather. See you soon, Mark." The drive through rainy New York streets gave Ella time to gather her thoughts. She arrived at the airline's Manhattan office tower, a sleek glass building that served as the nerve center for the entire operation. Ella was greeted with deference by staff who recognized her from a distance. Mark Chambers, a tall man with a polished aura, met Ella at the elevator, offering a handshake and a wide grin. "Ella, so glad you're here," he said, leading her through corridors lined with portraits of planes and corporate achievements. "It's official. You're the new majority owner. We've been drafting the reorganization plans. I can't wait to finalize them with you." They entered a spacious conference room overlooking the city. Several board members and top executives stood as Ella arrived, extending polite smiles. Ella took her seat at the head of the long table, quietly acknowledging the shift in power dynamics. Not so long ago, Ella was the one hoping for a chance to prove herself. Now, she commanded respect in a room of seasoned executives. After a round of formalities, Mark cleared his throat. "Ella, I understand you just flew in on one of our planes. How was the experience?" A hush descended on the room. Ella could sense everyone's curiosity. She cast a calm, measured gaze around the table. "Honestly," she said, "the flight highlighted several deficiencies in our customer service approach, especially around unconscious bias and discrimination." Murmurs rippled through the group. Mark sat up straighter, looking concerned. "Would you care to elaborate?" Ella recounted the events in detail. The flight attendant's refusal to let her remain in first class despite holding a valid ticket, the incident with the other passenger regarding the lavatory, and Sarah's general attitude. She emphasized that while she believed in accountability, she also recognized systemic issues. "I'm not out for revenge," Ella concluded. "I want to ensure that no passenger faces discrimination based on assumptions or prejudice. We must overhaul our training and disciplinary protocols." A board member with silver hair spoke up, looking troubled. "Miss Carter, that's appalling. We're deeply sorry you experienced that. Rest assured, we'll take swift action." Ella folded her hands on the table. "Yes, let's address this carefully, though. We need clear policies and a consistent approach to rectify the culture. Individual incidents might be the symptom, not just the cause." Over the next week, Ella juggled multiple meetings to establish her vision for the airline. She appointed a new director of diversity and inclusion to revamp the training curriculum for flight attendants and all frontline staff. She directed the HR department to create safe channels for employees to report discriminatory behavior, whether by colleagues or passengers. Ella even suggested forming a passenger liaison team to handle onboard disputes with compassion and fairness. Press releases soon hit the news. Ella Carter, now majority owner of Skyway Horizons Airline, read the headlines. The official statement included Ella's pledge to improve passenger experiences across all cabins, from economy to first class. Journalists clamored for interviews. Ella obliged in a calm, composed manner, citing a personal commitment to bridging racial and socio-economic divides in air travel. Behind the scenes, Ella requested a meeting with Sarah Whitman. The airline's leadership had already suspended Sarah, pending an investigation into passenger complaints, both Ella's and the man from seat 2C. Ella insisted on a face-to-face discussion, wanting to gauge Sarah's perspective and whether she was capable of genuine change. They arranged the meeting at the airline's HR office. Ella waited in a brightly lit conference room with glass walls, taking deep breaths to maintain composure. Though Ella had faced discrimination countless times in her life, confronting it, this directly still stirred emotional pangs. Soon the door opened. A timid Sarah walked in, escorted by the HR manager. She looked nervous, eyes darting around. Ella gestured for her to sit. "Sarah," Ella said softly, "thank you for coming." Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. "Miss Carter," she murmured, voice shaking. "First, let me say I'm sorry for what happened on the flight." Ella took a moment, studying Sarah's face. Remorse flickered there, but Ella couldn't tell if it was genuine or simply fear of consequences. "I appreciate that," Ella replied. "I'd like to understand your side. What led you to believe you had the right to bump me out of first class and then later confront another black passenger about using the first class lavatory?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but Ella wasn't entirely sure if they were tears of sorrow, shame, or resentment. The flight attendant spoke haltingly. I was overworked, anxious." A top-tier passenger demanded a seat. "I was told by my supervisor that he outranked certain other passengers, and I guess I panicked. I singled you out." "And the passenger in 2C, I don't know, I just had a moment of confusion. She let out a ragged breath. "I suppose I made assumptions." Ella's voice remained even. "Were those assumptions tied to the color of our skin?" Sarah's gaze dropped to the table. "I don't want to believe that about myself. I'm not proud of what I did. But I suppose it's possible I let certain biases influence my decisions." The HR manager stepped in calmly. "Sarah, you understand that discriminatory behavior is a serious violation of our code of conduct. We've already received complaints in the past about your interactions with passengers of color." Ella's eyes flicked toward the HR manager at that revelation, but she kept her focus on Sarah. "So, this isn't the first time then?" Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks. "It's never been this overt." "But I guess it's been noted," she whispered. She looked at Ella, voice trembling. "I'm a single mother with 2 kids. I made mistakes, huge mistakes. I swear I never intended to." Ella studied Sarah's downcast expression. She felt the tension in the room, the weight of a decision that could derail or redeem a life. Ella believed in accountability, but she also believed in the power of second chances if accompanied by genuine remorse and a commitment to change. Ella exhaled, pressing her fingertips together. Sarah, the new policies will require mandatory training for all flight staff, covering bias awareness, conflict resolution, and empathy. This is non-negotiable. If you choose to return to work assuming HR approves, it will be contingent upon your active participation and successful completion of these programs. Do you understand? Sarah nodded quickly, tears still glistening. Yes, absolutely. Ella's gaze hardened, but not with cruelty, rather with resolute seriousness. Any further complaints of discriminatory behavior will lead to immediate dismissal. I'm also expecting you to apologize to the other passenger who filed a complaint, publicly or privately as he prefers. I'm giving you an opportunity to stay employed, but it comes with conditions. Sarah's shoulders shook as she released a shaky breath. Thank you, she said softly. Why? I don't know how to thank you. Ella gave a curt nod. Your thanks is best expressed by changing how you treat people on the job. Show me through your actions. The HR manager gently placed a hand on Sarah's file. We'll formalize these conditions and schedule your training, Sarah. You're on probationary status for 90 days. If you pass that period with no further incidents and complete all training, you can continue your employment with a clean slate. Sarah nodded fervently, standing on unsteady feet. She gave Ella a fleeting look filled with a mixture of gratitude and shame. Then she quietly left the room, the HR manager following behind. Ella remained seated, her mind churning. She had just extended mercy to a woman who had demeaned her publicly, purely out of prejudice. But Ella recognized that firing Sarah might only perpetuate bitterness without healing. If Ella's goal was to truly change hearts and minds within the airline, this was the path she must walk, one that blended accountability with compassion. Days turned into weeks. News of Ella's flight experience and her policy reforms spread within the airline. Employees buzzed with discussions on the new training sessions and Ella's strong stance against discrimination. Many applauded Ella for tackling an issue that had long simmered under the surface. Some were wary, concerned that new guidelines might lead to micromanagement, but Ella assured them the goal was not to punish mistakes, but to foster an environment where staff could thrive and serve passengers without bias. Sarah's case became a cautionary tale. Flight attendants whispered about the close call she had. Some criticized Sarah's behavior, while others felt Ella had been lenient. Ella didn't mind the chatter. The important thing was that an example had been set. The airline was on notice that the old ways, the biases, would no longer be tolerated. Meanwhile, Ella continued her philanthropic work, seamlessly integrating it with her new role. She launched a scholarship initiative for aspiring young aviation professionals from underrepresented backgrounds, forging partnerships with flight schools and engineering programs. The airline pledged to hire a significant percentage of these scholarship recipients as interns and trainees. Ella's mission was clear: to reshape not just the airline's culture, but to address the broader inequalities that kept certain groups from accessing opportunities in aviation. 2 months later, Ella was scheduled to appear at a major corporate event for the airline, the official rollout of a new brand identity. The company had decided to rename itself Skyway Horizons to symbolize new beginnings and an open, inclusive future. Ella was the keynote speaker at the unveiling ceremony in a spacious airport hangar, with the airline's newly painted plane as the backdrop. Executives, media, and select employees gathered for the big moment. Ella stood on a stage, speaking passionately about the airline's commitment to fairness, innovation, and empathy. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed through the hangar. Ella felt a rush of gratitude for how far she had come and how far the airline still had to go, but at least it was on the right path. After the speech, Ella descended the stage and mingled with guests. She chatted with journalists, answered questions about her philanthropic goals, and posed for pictures with scholarship recipients. Eventually, she spotted Sarah standing near the back of the crowd, in uniform, looking uncertain. Ella excused herself from a conversation and approached the flight attendant. Sarah's eyes flickered with both apprehension and relief. "Miss Carter," she greeted. Ella offered a measured smile. "Sarah, how are you?" Sarah smoothed her uniform skirt nervously. "I've completed the training," she said quietly. "It was eye-opening. I realized how often I let my own biases slip into my work without even noticing." I wanted to say, "I'm truly sorry for any pain I caused you and the other passenger. I've also apologized to him. He was gracious enough to accept it." Ella nodded, letting a brief silence pass. Then she placed a hand gently on Sarah's shoulder. "I appreciate that. I hope you'll continue to learn and grow. We all have biases, Sarah, but what matters is how we address them." Sarah managed a small smile, eyes glimmering with genuine relief. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Ella's chest felt lighter. If the flight attendant, who had once so blatantly discriminated, could grow, perhaps there was hope for everyone who harbored unconscious prejudices. Ella had learned over her lifetime that transformation often starts with humility and honest reflection. In the following weeks, Ella continued to travel frequently, sometimes by private jet, other times on commercial flights, to see the real-time impact of the new policies. She heard passenger stories about improved service, witnessed flight attendants going the extra mile to ensure comfort. A few employees confided that Ella's presence brought them renewed motivation, knowing their airline was now led by someone who had experienced hardships firsthand and cared about their well-being. Finally, one crisp morning, Ella prepared to board another Skyway Horizons flight from Atlanta back to New York. This time, she was traveling for a major philanthropic gala. Dressed in a sleek but unpretentious pantsuit, Ella approached the gate, scanning her phone's digital boarding pass. The agent recognized her name but simply smiled politely and directed her toward the plane. No fuss, no drama, just professional courtesy. When Ella stepped onto the aircraft, she was greeted by a flight attendant, a new hire, Ella guessed, because of the bright eagerness in her eyes. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter," she said warmly. "We're so happy to have you with us." Ella thanked her. She made her way to the first-class cabin, feeling a wave of nostalgia for the day she had been denied this very seat. But now times had changed. The seats were the same plush leather, the overhead compartments just as spacious, yet the atmosphere felt different, lighter, more welcoming. She settled into her seat, adjusting her bag, and exhaled contentedly. Minutes later, to her mild surprise, who should appear but Sarah Whitman, wearing the same crisp uniform, her name tag pinned with pride. She was assigned to the first-class cabin today, and Ella felt a twinge of curiosity about how the dynamic would play out. Sarah approached, posture confident but respectful. "Good afternoon, Miss Carter. Would you like a pre-flight beverage? Champagne, perhaps, or sparkling water?" Ella offered a warm smile. "Sparkling water would be lovely, thank you." As Sarah departed to fetch the drink, Ella couldn't help but reflect on the extraordinary arc of their relationship. Months ago, Sarah had refused Ella's rightful seat in first class. Now, Ella was seated comfortably, served by a reformed attendant who recognized Ella's role but treated her not just as a VIP, but as a fellow human deserving of respect. The transformation was profound. When the flight took off, Ella gazed out the window at the receding Atlanta skyline. She thought about the concept of karma, how life has a way of balancing the scales. Sarah had faced the risk of losing her job. Ella could have fired her outright, but Ella chose a path of accountability and compassion. As a result, Sarah learned an invaluable lesson and retained her livelihood, becoming hopefully an ally in Ella's mission for change. True karma, Ella mused, isn't just about punishment. It can be about offering the chance for redemption, seeing if the other person can rise to the occasion. If Ella had used her power only to mete out revenge, perhaps Sarah would still be steeped in resentment, even blaming Ella for her downfall. Instead, Ella gave Sarah the opportunity to confront her prejudices and hopefully become a better person. The flight crew performed impeccably. Smooth beverage service, friendly smiles, genuine care for passenger comfort. Ella smiled to herself. This was the airline she had envisioned when she first decided to invest. An airline that valued every traveler's dignity, bridging differences with empathy and respect. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and Ella reclined her seat, indulging in a rare moment of relaxation. The plane soared above the clouds, pointing toward a horizon of possibility. Thank you for joining me on this dramatic and inspiring journey of transformation. Ella Carter's story reminds us that, regardless of our background or status, we all deserve respect and compassion. It also demonstrates the power of leadership and second chances. One decision grounded in empathy can turn a moment of injustice into a catalyst for profound, lasting change. If you found this story moving, enlightening, or simply entertaining, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you'll help spread empowering narratives that encourage unity and understanding in our everyday lives. And remember, each of us can make a difference, whether as a business leader or a regular passenger. We have the power to challenge discrimination and uplift others. Thank you again for watching, and stay tuned for more riveting stories.